little over a week ago, Governor of the RBA, Michelle Bullock, gave an evening presentation to the Australian business economists in Sydney. This is the counterpart to the presentation that the Governor does for us. The Governor and the Deputy Governor speak on alternate years to the OBE, and they speak on alternate years to the Economic Society. But the Economic Society speech happens to be in Brisbane. At the presentation that Michelle Bullock did, there were two major components. Firstly, she talked about monetary policy and really gave you the feeling that the RBA was ready to go again whenever necessary. In the second part of the speech, she talked about the new structure of the RBA, which would meet formally within the new structure on the 15th of February next year. And I think that has a lot of effect on how the RBA will act in response to the number we've got, because rather unsurprisingly, I guess, to anyone who's followed my stuff over the years, I have a very different view to what happened in yesterday's RBA than you will read in the media. The headline number did fall from 5.6% to 4.9%. The RBA doesn't consider the headline number, it considers core inflation, because there's a whole lot of random things happening in headline, including oil prices. For example, we've seen a decline in oil prices up until about 2 weeks ago, where oil prices bottomed out. I think that Brent crude, for example, by the end of the year is going to be $10 a barrel higher than it is right now. And a lot of the influence of that is the OPEC meeting, which is currently in progress. And so maybe early next year, the headline number won't look as good as it does now. But firstly, I'll go through the components, what I thought were the interesting components of the result, and then I'll talk about not headline CPI, but core CPI, and in particular the measure that the RBA looks at. If we look at the components, what really interested me, the first one that interested me was bread and cereal products. You know, the bread that you buy, that you need to buy every week, put on the table. That's still rising at 8.5% a year. Tobacco, of course, is rising at 10.4%, but that's heavily taxed. But the area that isn't heavily taxed is electricity, which is still rising at 10.1% a year. And gas and other household fuels is rising at 13% every year. Automotive fuel, in spite of a brief reprieve, is still rising at 8.6% every year. I think by the end of next month, it'll be higher than that. Insurance and household services is rising at 8.6% a year. So there's plenty of component measures which are still running at much, much stronger rates than the headline rate of 4.8%. And that's why the RBA, when it looks at inflation, it looks at the core inflation, and the measure that they now prefer is the trimmed mean. And the trimmed mean did fall. It fell from 5.4% all the way down to 5.3%. And earlier in the year, I can remember people in the US, leading economists in the US, when it got to these levels, saying that inflation was actually stuck here and it was going to hard to make it go down. So what I've done is I've put those numbers for core inflation into our model of the Australian short rate, and the Australian short rate model explains 90% of monthly variation in the cash rate for the last 32 years. And it currently tells me that the equilibrium cash rate is 458 basis points, which is 23 basis points than the actual cash rate of 435 basis points. So I think based on that core inflation number, that trimmed mean, that the RBA is more likely to rise lift rates rather than to leave them where they are. But taking note of the address to the ABE, where Michelle Bullock was at some length to show that how much more information would be available at the new structure of the board meeting in the 15th of February, and how much better briefing the measures would be, that people would be, and the fact that it's a 2-day meeting rather than a 1-day meeting. She was obviously wants to show emphasis on the new structure. So I think Michelle Bullock, I think that that's enough inflation that we got in the measure to increase rates at least one more time, but I think it's very likely that Michelle Bullock will defer it until she's got the full team together next in the beginning of next year, and at such time she could show that the matter has been great and deep consideration, and somebody will blame, and perhaps somebody will blame the rate hike on somebody else apart from her. So I do think it justifies a hike, but I think discretion by the RBA governor will mean that hike will come in February, not now.